Today we'd like to talk a little bit about introduction to backyard poultry. And I kind of like these little gifts here that talk about, well, everybody jumps into poultry at different times. Anytime we see the economy take a big dip, we see everybody run out and buy poultry. If things go bad, they buy poultry. But I think this time is a little different. We have a lot of people with their kids at home now full time, and it's a great project. Poultry is a great project for youth and young people. It's a great way to teach them about agriculture. It's a great way to teach them about life. It's a great way to teach them responsibility. And so these are some other reasons that people are getting them. But before people jump into it, as we've seen, lines at Tractor Supply, Southern States, and all the different stores, people are waiting to get poultry. So we want to talk a little bit about it. The first thing is you need to know the rules. Every state has its own rules. I don't know them for every state, but since we're here in Maryland, I do know the rules for Maryland are that you have to register your flock. There are reasons states want you to register your flock, and that is, in the case of a disease outbreak, they need to know where everybody has their birds at so that they're able to address that outbreak and to take care of it. They don't need to be out looking for birds if we have a problem, and so that's one of the reasons they do it. I do know that in Maryland, it's FOIA protected, so when you give the Department of Ag that, they don't release it to anybody except that the state veterinarian has access to it in times of an emergency. For those of you in Delaware, Delaware also requires you to register your flocks as well. So now, while many urban areas are changing laws to allow backyard poultry, there's still restrictions on like the number of birds, the gender of birds. For example, one of the local towns, you can have 5 females, but you're not allowed to have males. Why are they sexist against males? It's because males make a lot more noise. Roosters will crow, and that can cause problems. So a lot of the areas are putting in rules that allow you to have hens, but no males. Now, if you live outside the city limits, most of the counties and across the country are very liberal in their rules. If you're in an agricultural area, there's almost no rules whatsoever about owning birds, other than you will have setback rules from their property lines and things like that. However, by and large, there aren't a lot of rules for rural areas. But the biggest one, the one we always see the biggest problems with, are when people live in homeowners associations. Even homeowners associations out in the county will have rules. So if you live in a homeowners association, check and make sure that you follow their rules. You can petition to get them changed. I know of some that are homeowners associations, but they're not active, and I've seen people raise birds in those type of situations. So make sure that you go through and find out what's going on and check what rules are in place where you're at before you start. You don't want to start and end up with a problem because you started and weren't allowed to. So there are more rules. For example, birds must be maintained so they don't leave your property. And that's a very important one because then they become nuisance animal laws come into play and you're liable for damage. For example, I know somebody that had peacocks and he didn't think that he needed to pin them up, and they were getting on the neighbor's cars and scratching them, and all of a sudden now he's liable for all that damage. We've also had other issues where people's birds will eat people's crops. Strawberries in particular seem to be one that birds really like to eat a lot of. So we have to be careful when we deal with those things to make sure that we keep our birds at home. And part of that goes back to good neighbor relations. We want to make sure our neighbors aren't unhappy with us. Life is better when you get along with your neighbors. I've been in situations where it wasn't. Trust me, it's just better to get along. So this means we need to plan ahead on how you're going to handle these different situations. So all this needs to take place before you get your birds. So what is your plan? How are you going to deal with neighbors? If you get roosters, roosters are going to crow. They're going to crow in the middle of the night if headlights shine on their building. They're going to crow at all different times. So it's important to take care of this in advance. Let them know what you're doing. Talk to them. Make sure they don't have a problem. And then another way to do it is share eggs with them. People are a lot less mad at you if you share eggs with them occasionally. So one way to do it is to share what you have with them. Another thing to remember is time. Who's going to take care of the birds? It's a daily chore. Animals, you don't get a vacation. They're a responsibility. It's 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So who's going to take care of the birds? Now, like I said, most of my life, it was always the youth. That was their, as my kids grew up, that was their chores. We made sure they did them. And it was a great way to teach them responsibility. Another important aspect you need to worry about is, what about a family vacation? If the whole family wants to go on vacation, who's going to take care of the birds? Do you have a neighbor? Do you have friends? In the past, we've used friends from school and church to watch their kids' birds. They could go on vacation with us. But again, it's important to remember these things and have a plan in place before you start, because you don't want to have a whole bunch of birds, decide you want to go on vacation, don't have anything ready to go. Other things to consider is the safety or housing of your birds. Birds are pretty easy. Once they're full grown, chickens just need basic protection from the weather and kept safe from predators, and just have a place for food and water. It's a little more difficult with younger birds because they need extra housing that provides heat, because they can't provide their own heat. But once they get fully feathered and outside, they're fairly easy to take care of. Other questions? Where are you going to get your feed? Now, we live in one of the most blessed parts of the world. It's real easy. You can run down to the local feed store and pick up feed. But there are other considerations as well. These birds are going to produce manure. What are you going to do with that manure? Where is it going to go? Are you going to put it on your garden? Are you going to compost it? These things need to be figured out before you do it. If you do put it on your garden, what about the possibility of contaminating your vegetables? You need to compost it first. There's all kinds of rules that you need to look at on those things. What will you do if there's a disease problem? Do you have a veterinarian? Do you know what to do? Do you know what the signs are? We'll talk about diseases another day. And then the other one that people often don't look at is, what will you do if one of your birds dies? A lot of places you can't just go bury animals in your backyard. It's kind of against the law. So we need to be careful. Check and see what's going on. Know what the rules are where you live, so that you're able to follow them and abide by those rules. And part of the reason is, if you have a bird die that's diseased and you just throw it in the garbage and send it to the dump, well, if that disease was spreadable, what happens at the dump is you have all those wild birds there that can now pick that disease up and spread it around. So these are concerns that we have that we need to address before we get birds to think about. All right, let's talk a little bit about breeds. I could spend all day talking about different types of chickens. I love the different types. It's one of the funnest things there is to deal with chickens. There's over 400 different varieties of breeds and colors of chickens. But let's start off with, there's come in two different sizes. As you can see here, these chicks are actually within a couple days of each other. Here we have a standard size chick, standard breed chick, and then we have the bantam here. And again, these are only a couple days difference in age, but you can already see the size difference. So again, bantams are a miniature of the larger chickens. They're also available in ducks as well. They're usually about a quarter to a fifth the size of a regular bird. They're mainly used as ornamentals. However, they can lay lots of eggs. Now, their eggs won't be as big, but they can be very good at egg production. So if you have a small area, don't have a lot of space, get a small chicken. It's one way to handle the situation. Select the breed that best fits your goals. Why are you doing this? Are you doing it for breed preservation? There's a lot of different breeds that are going extinct across the planet every day, and people don't really spend a lot of time looking at all the different farm breeds that we're losing all the time. So breed preservation is one reason I know a lot of people raise birds. Are you doing it for both meat and eggs? Then you want a dual-purpose bird. If you want meat production, then you want to look at a meat-producing bird. Same for eggs. Egg-producing birds aren't going to give you much meat, but they're going to lay a lot of eggs. Meat birds don't give you much eggs, but they give you a lot of meat. So you've got to look at what you want to do. One thing I always tell everybody too, if you can't find something that fits your ideal exactly, well, get some birds, start crossing them, and come up with your own breed. That's how these breeds all originated to start with. So have fun with it. It's a great way to teach and learn about genetics and see how genes interact. And again, like I said, there's over 400 different varieties and colors of chickens out there right now. Not all of them are all easily available, but you know what? You can find something for everybody out there. If you're producing meat, what do your customers want? People don't really think about that, but in parts of the world, they want a white skin, which is in Europe and places in Europe. However, in America, you definitely want a yellow-skinned bird. So you want to look at what you want to do. Do you want a lot of breast meat or do you want a lot of dark meat? Again, these are important considerations depending on which breed you want to get. When you look at eggs, what color of eggs do you want? What size of eggs do you want? Eggs come in all kinds of colors. As you can see from the picture here, you can get some dark, almost chocolate, and you've got blue, brown, some tan, white. I mean, they come in all different colors. So again, what is it that you want to sell? One of my friends going through college, he put himself through college selling blue eggs to a health food store because they were lower in cholesterol. Is that true or not? Honestly, I don't know, but the eggs were a little bit smaller, so it's probably true, just because they were smaller eggs. Some dual-purpose breeds. You'll recognize a lot of these because a lot of these are standard breeds that have been around for a long time. For example, just looking at this list here, I've raised every one of these breeds except the Delaware. There's the Plymouth Rock. You know, they're fair egg producers. They lay a large egg, brown eggs. They're fairly calm, and they forage. And one thing we talk about is forageability, and that is how much they'll run around outside and look for food. Now, while chickens can't get much food from grass, the bugs are really good for them, and the grass they do eat can make their skin yellower and their yolks yellower, which people really enjoy. So as you look down this list, these are all fairly calm birds, and that's something else to remember. Some birds are a lot more hyper, just like people, and some birds are more mellow. So you want to look through this. Now, if you want, like Rhode Island Reds are going to produce more eggs than a Plymouth Rock typically, but they're not going to have quite the meat quality of a Plymouth Rock. So as you go through this, you're going to have trade-offs. So it's important to find one that you like. And again, if you go down the Dominique, it's going to do a better job of running around your yard, picking up bugs and things like that. Now, also remember, if you're going to let them run around your yard, you want to be careful because they will also get in your garden and they will eat your young plants. Trust me, that has happened a few times and caused issues with my wife. Egg layers. We have a lot of different egg layers. Typically, you start off with the Leghorns. They're actually one of my favorite breeds, to be honest with you, but they're kind of spastic. They're not a great one for beginners because they're going to fly. They're going to go everywhere. They're not very friendly. They're more interested in going about their own business than they are in you. However, they are very good egg layers, so that's always an easy choice. Most of your Mediterranean breeds are good egg layers. Australorps is another one. They lay a large, dark egg. They're calm. So that's one of the ones that's actually a fairly good bird. However, they're not so great at foraging and finding their own food. And sometimes they will sit on their own eggs. I should talk what broody means. If you look at that last category over here, talks about broodiness. And broodiness is basically the ability of mother to be a mother. So birds that go broody will stop laying eggs. They'll sit on the eggs. They'll hatch the eggs, then raise the chicks. After which, then they'll go back to laying eggs again. So if you have broody hens, they're not providing you eggs. However, they can provide you with offspring down the road. So if that's something you want to do, and it's a fun project to have kids do, to have a hen sit on a nest and wait for them to hatch, it's a lot of fun to do with kids. That is something you want to look at. If you don't care about that and you still want to hatch eggs, there's incubators are readily available at feed stores. That's a whole nother class, another day for that one, but it's a lot of fun as well. Again, the one thing I do want to point out on here is if you look at the bottom, these sex links, this is actually one of the newer ones. They come in a lot of different colors. You can get brown sex links, black sex links. Now they've got some, I've seen lavender and sapphire lately as well. And those breeds are usually lay very good layers. They're usually a commercial style layer, and they're calm. They don't forage very well, but they're very good for beginners. They're one of those. A brown sex link is one of the beginner birds I would suggest for people just because they're hard to go wrong with. If you give them good food and water, they're going to do well for you. So they're one of the breeds I often tell people to look at if you're going to start off with. And again, another very popular one is the Americana, because they lay the blue, the green eggs, and that's something that people really like, Easter eggers. Again, there's nothing wrong with having a good green egg every once in a while with some ham. All right, if we go to the meat breeds, we have the Cornish, the Jersey Giant, Hampshires. Freedom Rangers is one we're seeing a lot of that's very popular with backyard people that are trying to make money on backyard birds. They're a breed, if I remember right, that came out of France. They're the label Rouge birds. They do grow fairly well. Their feed conversion is not what I would like to see. I've worked with a lot of farmers over the years that have used those, and they don't convert food to meat at a very good rate compared to something like a modern broiler. And again, that last one, if you really want some meat, a modern broiler, you can't beat them. They're going to give you the best feed conversion. They're calm. They're not going to go anywhere. You can leave the door open. They ain't running away. They're like a teenage boy with a new video game. If they've got food and water, they ain't going anywhere. So again, that's another option. But again, you need to go and find a breed that fits your needs. And there's one out there, trust me. Other things to consider is some chickens do better in cooler areas than others do better in hot areas. For example, Mediterranean breeds, they usually have a big single comb, which is a single comb is right here. It's the one comb down the middle of the head. It's usually very large in Mediterranean breeds. And they do pretty well in hot, humid areas because they have that extra surface area to help dissipate the heat. Acts like a radiator. American breeds typically do better in the cooler areas. And they're going to have these smaller combs, such as a bush comb, this one here, or a pea comb. They're going to have a smaller comb. And the reason that is because combs, if they're very large and you live in a cold area, can get frostbite. Now, we live in Maryland here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. We never get the really, really bad summers, and we never get the really, really bad winters. So we can pretty much grow any type of bird out there. So again, it's fairly easy depending on where you're at. Now, if you're up north, you're going to want to avoid these large combs. And if you're down south, you're going to want to avoid birds that have a lot of feathering, such as your cochins and things like that, which have extra feathers to keep them warm. Housing. Let's talk a little bit about housing. There are two main types of housing. There's the movable housing, and I think I saw a chicken tractor is another word for them. There's a question in there. What are effective ways to predator-proof mobile chickens houses? We'll talk about that in a second. So we have movable housing, and you move those to a new location. Typically, they're used in fairly flat areas because if you put them in areas which are rough and rolly and they don't sit close to the ground, then you really have a lot more problems with predators. We also have fixed housing. This is housing that can't be moved. This is the old traditional type of housing that you see, in grandma's farm where you have the chicken coop out back and they have a run area where they run around. Some of them actually go a little bit more fancy, and they'll put multiple areas around there where they can have runs for the chickens to go outside. So maybe they'll let them in this pasture today and that pasture tomorrow. In doing so, they don't destroy the pasture. If you put chickens in an area for a long time, they're going to peck everything, they're going to scratch everything, and before long, all you have is naked ground. Here's some pictures of some movable housing. And I will say this farmer here, and this farmer here, all of them use electric netting around their birds to help keep predators back. Because if these aren't making a tight contact with the ground, if you look along here, you see this bar where it hits the ground. If that's not making a tight contact, predators will go right underneath that and get your birds in a heartbeat. So you want to make sure that they're always good contact with the ground wherever you move them. And some of them will actually, you can see the electric netting here, electric fencing. They're going to put an electric fence around the outside perimeter as well to try and keep predators back. Predators can be a problem depending on where you live. So right now I live next to the woods. There's some woods behind me and a state forest, and we have a large problem with raccoons and foxes. So to us, a movable housing would be very difficult, so we stick with the fixed housing. And when we look at fixed housing, we can start off with this one here. This is what my wife wants. This is what she thinks she needs. And I look at that and think there's more money in ironwork than there is in my whole house. And as a true husband, this is what I think. So as you can tell, that fixed housing can come in all different shapes and sizes as well. Again, I always tell everybody when they ask me what is the perfect chicken house, and I say it's the one that you have that protects them from the environment, from predators, and provides a place for food and water. If you hit those things, you can do almost anything. I've seen houses made out of straw bales with a tarp over the top that worked very well until they were able to build something else. So again, housing just needs to meet the demands of the birds. And like I said, those demands of the birds are to protect from weather, predators, injury, and theft. You often don't think about the last one, but if you think back, you can always remember the chicken thief. You hear grandma talk about a chicken thief. But anyway, the other thing you want to do is consider where you put on your property. Make sure it's not an area that the water all sits and pools in. You want to keep your birds in a higher area, someplace that drains away from so that they stay dry. Like all animals, if they're kept in a marshy area, they're going to have poor health and it's going to be hard on them, just like it is on us. We need to stay dry. You want to consider keeping your poultry coldly confined. Now, I say that with a grain of salt. We say that because that's a good way to protect them from predators and it's a good way to protect them from diseases. However, it does really look cool when your chickens are running around the backyard eating bugs and stuff. So again, a lot of people I know will let their birds out in the evening for a few hours before they put them to bed to let them to run through instead of leaving them run through all day. I've had experiences where the birds were let outside all day. I've had eagles get them. I've had hawks get them. Even if you think you're there in your house, they'll still disappear on you. So you have to be careful when your birds are outside. It's something you need to consider when you consider letting them go. If you do make a run, which I encourage most people to have a run, because there's times of year there are no grass, there is nothing for them to do, and keeping them confined makes sense. I would encourage you to put a lid over the top to prevent things from climbing in or hawks from diving in. But at the same time, you want to bury the fencing to go down into the ground. That way that the animals such as foxes can't dig underneath your pen and come up and get your birds. Again, I usually tell everybody to make it an L shape. I don't have an example of it here. But if your fence goes down and then out If a predator digs, it digs into a corner. Another important consideration when burying fence wiring is to consider what type of wiring you're burying. If it's just regular wire, galvanized, it's not going to last very long. So I tell everybody, if you're going to bury wire in the ground, use a PVC coated wire so that it's going to be able to be in there for a long period of time. It's nothing worse than having to fix problems. Wire size is a very important consideration. 1 inch is really a pretty good size for poultry netting. It's small enough to prevent predators such as mink and weasels from getting in. Those are kind of cause a lot of problems for you. It's one of those predators. It also keeps most wild birds out. And when we build our housing, it's something to consider. Wild birds can carry diseases and parasites. So if we want to keep them separated, we want to make sure that we use a wire on our wire fence that's small enough to keep them and exclude them from our house. You want to consider the proximity to your house and the house of your neighbors. It's not going to get you very good neighbor relations if you build it right next to their back window. So consider these things when you're looking at it. Where are you going to put it? Can I put it far away from everybody? Because no matter what happens, when you have animals, you get a few extra flies. It's just the way life is. So there will be a few extra flies. And again, if you have a rooster, there's noise. So if you put it next to your neighbors, it might not be the best way to maintain a good relationship with them. Again, look for areas that are well drained. The other question is, are you going to run electric out there? And water. Those things really, really help. If you have electric out there, you can keep water heaters out there during the winter to keep the water free from ice. How close to water? Do you want to walk the water out there every day? So these are things to consider. If you have kids, it's great. They can take care of it. However, when they go off to college and it's your job, maybe it's time to change and put that water line and electric line out there. Poultry required a dry, draft-free house. Now, in most parts around the country, unless you get far up north, we don't have to worry about insulating our poultry houses. And for the mid-Atlantic, there's no need to insulate your poultry house. Your birds, once they're older, are not going to have any problems as long as you keep them dry and there's no direct wind blowing on them. So again, it's fairly easy to make a good housing for your birds. The important is, I've shown lots of different pictures. The important thing to remember on this is there's no one perfect way to do it. There are hundreds of ways to make a chicken house that will work as long as, remember, all it has to do is protect the birds and provide a place for food and water. Space is another consideration. I showed you those bantam chicks. They don't need a lot of space. So inside space, you can get by with 1 square foot. Laying hens, 1.5. I just tell everybody on a standard size chicken, just go to 2 square feet. While the laying hens can get by with a little less size, they're a little more active. So more area is a lot better for them. And again, I like to provide outside space, give them as much outside space as you can. Anybody interested in geese, they take a lot of space, let me tell you, and they're very difficult to work with. But again, for chickens, we tell everybody inside 2 square feet and outside as much as you can do. How do you get your birds? We've got them a long way. We've got the rules, housing, and now we're getting our birds. The easiest way a lot of people are getting them nowadays is to order from hatcheries. I can remember waiting for the box to show up with all the different chicks in it. It's a very effective way that allows for a live selection of breeds because there's a lot of hatcheries out there and they sell chicks and there's all different kinds. You have a large number to choose from. Now, the important thing to remember when you're looking for these, everybody uses the web nowadays. So you can do a quick search on the web, but you're going to look for something that's NPIP, which is National Poultry Improvement Program. Hatcheries that participate in that have birds that are pallorium and typhoid free. They can also go on to get birds that are also salmonella free and several other disease free strains. So in order, don't buy birds unless they say NPIP, and then you can look and see what extras they have. So, disease protections they have. So again, it's something that's very important to look for. And it's kind of cool, we ship chicks all over the world that are hatched. And chicks can be shipped by mail because prior to hatching, they draw the yolk back into their abdomen. And it can be a source of energy for up to 3 days. However, having said that, if you order chicks, they're probably going to show up. Most of them show up. They send them on Saturday. I've had so many phone calls from the post office on Sunday morning saying, my chicks are there, come get them. So be ready to go get them a day early because when they come in, be ready to go and pick them up because the faster you get them on food and water, the healthier those birds will be. While they can make it 3 days without food and water, it's not the best thing in the world for them. So we want to get them onto food and water as fast as we can. Another easy way to get them is go to the local feed store. Now this has got a Tractor Supply picture here. I'm not promoting Tractor Supply. It just happened to be the picture I had. My daughter came home from town one day with these, so I had a picture of a box. So this is a real easy way to get them. It's convenient. You can pick up all the supplies you need at the store, but at the same time, you want to make sure those supplies are in place and you have everything ready before you get the birds. Now, it's easier, but there's also less selection. You never know what that store is going to get. Several stores will actually put out flyers telling them when they get birds and they pre-order. For example, we have a store right here, Southern States, that does that. You can check their thing. They have a list of when birds will come in. Now, these stores almost always, I don't know of any that don't use NPIP hatcheries. So these stores are looking for reliable hatcheries because they want to sell a product that's very valuable to their customers, and they don't want to sell something that's bad. Now that you've got your birds, we can divide this up into 3 different areas. We're going to have different stages of growth. We're going to have brooding, we're going to have growing, and then we're going to have egg production. We're going to talk a bit today about brooding because it's the first step on there. And this is generally considered the time from when you get the birds for 14 days. This is the most important time in the life of those chicks. Just like with any baby animal, that very beginning is when things need to get off to a good start, or you're going to have problems with them in the future. So we want to make sure that they get done. Time, it's also the time of the most rapid development. They're going through a lot of changes in their bodies. Remember, when you get those chicks, they're all covered with down. During this time, they're going to start getting feathers. They're going to be able to take care of themselves better. For example, when chicks come, they're more like a lizard. They cannot regulate their own temperature. They have to get by a warm spot and a cool spot. They move back and forth. But as they get more feathers and they grow bigger, they're able to regulate their temperature so that by the time they're a few weeks old, they're able to take care of themselves. So brooding is the same no matter what type of production you're doing, whether it's organic, free range, etc. It really doesn't matter. It's going to be the same. All right, when we talk about brooding, we're going to talk about 6 different things. But I like this picture for one really good question. How many chickens, how many teeth does a chicken have? You know, my grandma used to always say it's rare as hen's teeth. If you look at this chick, I'm just to get off track here a little bit. Look at that little bit right on the end of its beak right there. That is its egg tooth, and that egg tooth is how they use to hatch out. You can tell that chick is very new because the egg tooth is still on there. It usually falls off shortly after hatching. So you can see those for a day or so afterwards, and sometimes they fall off within a couple hours. So it's usually an indicator when you see those chicks are freshly hatched. All right, back on track. So we have 6 different parts of brooding. We have pre-placement, which is getting everything ready before the birds come. And to me, that's the most important thing. It's not good to be trying to get everything in place once those birds are there. So make sure that you have everything ready to go before the birds come. Then we have food and water management, temperature, and then lighting is important as well. Not so much right now. We won't talk too much about lighting, but ventilation. We always want to make sure that we have fresh air for our birds, and to take care of them and to make sure that they're free of, not free, but they're not being blown on, but at the same time that they're getting fresh air to change that oxygen. All right, a note on feed and water. Here's a picture of a feed store. I mean, look at all those different selections. For beginners, it's easiest if you just purchase food from your local farm store. And I mean that I've had people call up and say, I want to start raising birds. I want to grow my own food. I want to do, and you know what? Take it one step at a time. Learn to grow your birds, take care of that, then learn to mix feed later on. But again, here's kind of an example of what you want to look for. You want to look for a starter. The starter should have 20 to 24% protein. Grower, 18 to 20% protein. And then when we get to layers, there's also a finisher in there too sometimes, which is about 16 to 18% protein. And then when we get to layers, we want about 16% protein. And a layer diet is very important because it has to have the calcium and phosphorus that those layers need in order to produce the shells. There's a lot of calcium in there, so that calcium phosphorus ratio is very important. You can get all kinds of different types of food. You can get organic, you can get medicated. And usually if you're buying medicated feed at a feed store, it's usually something that's going to control coccidia. They're called ionophores, typically what they're going to feed. They're called an antibiotic, but they're not really an antibiotic. It's kind of a really weird category. But basically, coccidia is a very small parasite. They're all over the whole world. It's a little tiny worm that gets in the intestine, and so it can be very hard on your birds. So it's something that is very common to put in little birds to help them get off to a good start, and then later on, you remove it, and the birds build up immunity to it. Again, you can get organic, you can get GMO-free, you can get about anything you really want. We're very blessed in this country to be able to do that. Then water. Water needs to be clean. And I tell everybody, if you're looking at water for your chickens, it needs to be water that you would drink. Don't give your birds water that you wouldn't be willing to drink yourself. Now, granted, once you give it to them, they may mess it up and do stuff with it. But again, you need to change it off and keep it as clean as you can. To encourage chicks to eat, we often tell people to put extra feed trays or feed it on the floor so they find it. For example, you look in this picture, there's food right here on this paper. So these chicks are pecking at it. You put the chicks right on top of the food. So the first thing that they're pecking at is going to be the food itself. So they're going to get what they need right away. And again, you can see they've already played in their water and got shavings in it. So we have to clean those quite often as we have them in there. We want these things to be as low as they'll go. Remember, those chicks aren't very big, so you want to make sure your food is down where it can be readily accessed, as well as water. Now, some people will say, with these chicks, you're fine. They're not going to drown in this water. They could get a little wet, but they're not going to drown. Now, if you were doing quail in this, you'd want to put like marbles or something in that water so they can't fall in there and drown. These guys are going to be just fine. They're big enough, it's not going to be an issue. There's a lot of different things you can use to put feed on. Example here, this is just a file folder. You can use pie tins. Egg flats is very common. I've seen those used a lot. I've seen newspaper just spread out and had newspaper put on them. Again, something that you can put out there that will hold that food. And you use it for the first couple days till they learn to eat. Then you remove it. You don't want to leave it in there too long. Waters need to be cleaned daily. You saw in that last picture, those birds had already got them dirty. So I tell everybody daily, but often if I'm dealing with young chicks, I will clean them a couple times a day just to make sure everything is there clean. Chick starters are usually a crumble or a mash. And that means it needs to be little particles because remember, they're very small birds. They can't eat big things. As birds get older, you'll see people start feeding pellets, which is fine with older birds, but you need to make sure that those birds, when they first come, have the smaller size food. And then you want to place your food and your water close to the heat source so those birds can find them. You see this circles kind of situation kind of radiating out. Here's the heat. We kind of radiate out with food and water. That way, no matter where they go, they run into food and water. And that's important when they're little because they can't get very far. We want to make sure that they find that and grow. For the first week, we want to make sure our feeders are full. You look up here, you see how full that feeder is. We want to keep it that way for the first week. Now, having said that, they're going to waste a lot of feed and throw feed out. So after about a week, we want to only make it 3/4 full so they're not going to waste as much. We'll keep it that way for a couple of weeks, and then we'll drop it down to where it's only about half full. And this helps keep the chicks from wasting feed. Provide enough feeder space that all the birds can eat at once. That's the easiest way to remember it. I mean, there's all kinds of linear inches, this, that, and the other, but if your birds can all eat at the same time, you've got enough feeder space. So when they're real little, you might have a lot of extra space, but as they grow, that space will fill in. One thing I did want to mention before I go on, and that is a lot of people will put vitamins and minerals in their water, and that's okay. But remember, when you put those in there, you're also providing food for bacteria. The other thing to remember, too, is a lot of very common practice is to put sugar in the water for day-old chicks. I'm not against that, particularly if the birds have had a really hard trip to get to you. But at the same time, it's not always necessary. And so I wouldn't use it every time. I would just use it when it's needed. But you're going to have to make that judgment based upon your birds. I don't think I've used it in a few years, but I have used it before. So again, there's a lot of different things you could do, but you need to judge that based upon your birds. If they're not looking good, try different things. But if they're healthy and doing well, don't add extras because they don't need it. And it also, again, sugar water will also give your bacteria a chance to grow, and it's harder to keep things clean. The other thing about sugar water is if they fill up on that, they're not eating their diet. And that's just energy. We want to make sure that they also get some of those vitamins, minerals, and carbohydrates, which are coming from the feed. But again, if they've had a really tough trip and they're looking bad, it's very important to get energy in them quick, and that's one easy way to do it. You can also dip some of the beaks of the chickens in the water when you first place them in there, and to show them they'll drink. You don't need to do them all, but once one or two start drinking, the rest will follow suit, and it's easy to catch on. Heating. Chicks need heat. They're not able to provide the body heat, so I always tell everybody, have a thermometer. Keep one on hand. And one reason I say put everything in place is you want to make sure the floor you're putting those, the shavings or whatever bedding you have under those chickens is warm when you put them in, because if it's cold, they're going to get cold really quick. So you want to make sure that you've heated things up before the birds get there. You want to start off about 92 to 95 degrees, and then we tell everybody you can lower it 5 degrees each week. However, once those chicks become feathered, they get all their feathers, you can really drop it pretty quickly to save energy. Again, you want them to be in a place where there's ventilation but not breeze. It should be light, airy, and feel good, not stuffy. And after chicks are placed, you need to watch them and then adjust the temperature based upon how they react to meet their needs. For example, you see these chicks, they're all spread out, they're happy, not a problem. That's what you want to see when you look at it. It doesn't have to be a circle, folks. It can be a square, whatever shape. Just circles traditional. Okay, if you look at these chicks, you can see they're way too cold. You can see how they're all huddled up underneath the heater trying to get warm. So that tells you need to increase your heat. You can do that by turning the heat up higher, or in the case if you're using a hot heat lamp like most of us do, lower it a little closer to the birds to get them warmer. Here we have just the opposite. The chicks are hot. They're getting as far away from that heat as they can. So in this case, we want to turn the heat down or raise that heat lamp in order to get them back underneath and moving around and spreading out. This one's kind of a little bit more harder. This means there's a draft. Well, you can't see how the air is going, so we tell people use like tissue paper or get some flour and blow it in the air and just see how that air is moving so you can find where that breeze is coming from and take care of it. Another way to do it is just put a solid wall around them so that the breeze doesn't get down on them, and that's probably one of the easiest ways to do it. We often talk about putting something for the chickens on the floor. Most typical is this here is pine shavings, but we can use rice hulls as well. Use whatever you have. It plays an important function. It absorbs the moisture in their poop, keeps things dry, and also provides a cushion for them, and it insulates them from the ground. So it provides a lot of important factors. So when you're looking at these things, consider what you have. At the same time, look for things that are going to be healthy for the birds. So you want to make sure they're dry. You want to make sure they're mold-free. Growing, it covers the time from end of brooding until they're fully sexually mature, or in the case of broilers, until you harvest them for meat birds. Now, the management's not as intensive, but you still have to take care of them every day, and you still need to watch them and make sure their body temperature is doing all right. We tell everybody, everybody wants to, how soon can I put my birds outside? Well, that's going to depend a lot upon the weather. If you've got really good weather, you can let them go out when they're younger. If it's cold, you're going to have to wait till they're older. However, we do encourage people to keep their birds locked up to they're 4 weeks old. That way, that we know that they're big enough and they can handle the sudden changes, and they're not going to get harmed by being outside. Again, during this time period, the mortality is usually lower in your chicks because they already know how to find food and water, and they've recovered from that transportation to your farm. The birds are going to grow rapidly, but at the same time, you don't want to let them run out of food. Birds that aren't eating aren't growing, so again, it's stressful for them and can cause digestive issues if they run out of food all the time. Feeders need to be adjusted to the proper height. If you see this picture here, you see all this feed on the ground. It's because that feeder's too low. Those birds are wasting food. Now, if we were to raise that up, we would have less feed wastage. Also, they have the feed level in their pan is way too high. There's a couple issues here. So when I say you want to do that, wrong slide. Water is also important. Chickens have to, if you see here, she's getting a beak full of water, then she has to tip her head back. So this water is way too low. So what we really want to see, and here's a couple examples. Here we have for the first week, see how low that is? That's what we want to do. As they grow, we want to move it up about breast height. Then when they're adults, we want it about mid-breast. You can see how the height adjusts. This is for feeders. As they get bigger, we want to adjust that height up. For water, it's very similar, only it's a little bit higher. And again, that's because they're going to dip those beaks full and tip their beaks back, and this makes it easier for them to drink. But again, when we first get them that first week, we want it as low as it'll go in order to provide access to those little birds. All right, eggs production and breeding. The amount of time it takes for chicks to be sexually mature varies by breed. Usually, birds will start laying about 18 to 22 weeks. There are some breeds like Fayomis, some of your sexlings and commercial layers will actually start at 16, 17 weeks. Lighter breeds typically get there faster than heavier breeds. So again, remember that when you're starting these projects, you're not going to get eggs till a long time out. And again, feed and water have to be available at all times. We had a class on managing these guys, egg production, yesterday. So again, we'll go back and redo that one later because we want to do these in order now. The other way was just kind of a spontaneous. So water is important. It's the major component of eggs. You want to make sure the water is available for them. During hot weather, you're going to want to change that water daily. Make sure that the water is cool as you can get it because that really helps them. Again, I mentioned this earlier, layer feed needs to have adequate calcium and the phosphorus level needs to be appropriate. Now, a lot of people will put something out, for example, for hens to munch on, like access to oyster shells, free choice, and that's not going to hurt them. And if you can go ahead and do that by all means, it's not going to dilute their diet. They will only eat what they need. And so it's not a problem. It's available at most of your feed stores. And again, it's also available online. You can also get other types of grit. You see granite grit out there as well. So grit, while not necessary, they'll pick up rocks and pebbles as they go munching around in the yard anyway. But again, if you want to, these are available to add to your diet. You're going to need nest boxes. Again, we usually say a 12 by 12 by 12, real easy way to do it. You want one nest box for every 4 to 6 hens. And nests need to be put somewhere shady because birds, when they're going to lay eggs, they want to go someplace that's quiet, shady, and free of stress. So again, a shady spot is best. If you put it out in direct sunlight, they're going to ignore it and go find somewhere else to lay eggs. I want to mention this real quick, then we'll get to the questions. Biosecurity, life security, this is something we talk about quite often. We're talking about it in human people now. Say, social distancing, covering your face, stay at home. Same things. It's called biosecurity. We do this in animal production all the time, and it's important because we want to keep our flocks healthy and free of disease. There's 3 different parts to it. There's isolation. We keep our birds isolated from other birds. In doing so, we can keep them healthier. We want to separate our birds by age. If I decide to get a new flock, I want to keep them separate from my old flock, because if I mix them together, the old flock can pass disease on to the young ones. Traffic control, again, who comes on and off your farm, and sanitation. Don't bring any equipment on your farm that you don't clean and sanitize first. We'll do this another day. One thing I do want to say is keep signs up. This is a small farm next to a county fairgrounds, and had a lot of problems with people climbing over the fence to go look at his animals because he's got, goats, sheep, and chickens. So we put a sign up, and we put that sign up 7 years ago, and no one's crossed over that fence since. So that's an easy way to let people know that you want them to stay back. I wanted to talk about this real quick. Predators, and we're going to do a whole class on predators. But little chicks are very vulnerable to predators, and the list goes on and on and on and on. But one that's often overlooked is that everybody thinks they're cat and dog or angels. Well, they're actually some of the biggest problems we see. So again, as you're designing and as you're looking at this project, think about these things. You may have to train your animals, your dogs and cats, to leave them alone. It's very doable. I've used hunting dogs my whole life and not had a real problem with them harming chickens at home because they know that that's a different situation. They're not to do it. So again, they can learn, and it is teachable. And we'll go over this another day. But this list is really, really long, and there's a lot of different things and signs that you can look for to figure out what happened and why your birds are missing. Again, let's talk for another day.